I give you the father of the guy who started The Chosen, Steve Thompson.
Hey, well, thanks, guys. It is great to be here. I think Paul is a marketing genius. He's got like crispy bacon and free use of the women's restroom. And then I understand he kind of led with the whole idea of The Chosen this morning. So I am going to talk about The Chosen and have some time at the end to have some Q&A about The Chosen. But that is just part of the story I wanted to share with you today. And what a great group. Although, Paul, I'm a little concerned about a group that prays after you eat. I mean, has there been any issues with the food here at all, or is you still fine? Okay. Okay. So I have a question for you as we start. Are you gaining ground or are you losing it? The title of what I want to talk to you about today is Losing, Choosing, and the Chosen. In the early 70s, Mary Chapin Carpenter recorded a song called Why Walk When You Can Fly. Let me just read you the first few lines of that. In this world, there's a whole lot of trouble, baby. That's what my mom told me. And I think she took that from Jesus. In this world, there's a whole lot of pain. In this world, there's a whole lot of trouble, but a whole lot of ground to gain. So why take when you could be giving? Why watch as the world goes by? It's a hard enough life to be living. Why walk when you can fly? So today, I want to tell the story of God in my life to both celebrate and to publicly claim the ground that has been gained. Let me tell you quickly the losing story. I grew up in Kansas City. I've got a lot in common with Bruce here, by the way. He spent time in Kansas City as well with Hallmark cards. I graduated from high school there in 1973, and I wasn't the best student. Okay, just to be clear, I graduated in the upper 90% of the class, and but I was, however, elected not most likely to succeed, unfortunately, but never a dull moment. So there's something there. I mean, you got to take what you can get. But I went on to college at Missouri State, and I was raised in the church. I was a Christian. I'd gone to youth group. Raised in the Grandview Baptist Church, but at Missouri State, I just started down a path that was away from God. I honestly got in some trouble there. I tell people, I told my mom and dad then, mostly innocent mistakes, misunderstandings, and I didn't even know some of those things were illegal. I mean, but I did graduate in 1977, and then moved out to the Pacific Northwest and worked in Oregon, the state of Oregon. I was doing work in the Recreation and Parks Administration space with the Parks and Recreation Agency of the Mid-Willamette Valley. But after about a year, I got a call from a couple of guys I went to college with, and they said, "We're quitting our jobs and we're going to Alaska. Do you want to quit your job and go?" I said, "Absolutely." So spent 4 months or so in Alaska. And when you're just hiking and fishing in Alaska, you don't need a lot of money, but eventually you do run out. And so went back to Oregon, went to work in canneries, third shift. You just take your Social Security card to the cannery and you work third shift and work for a week, then you quit, and you go back to skiing and hiking until you run out of money, you start over again. That is not really a sustainable model. But I did apply to graduate school at the University of Illinois in Urbana. As Bruce well knows, the crown jewel of public higher education. And from there, I mean, candidly, things went from bad to worse. I was losing my identity. I was pursuing a lifestyle and things that were far, far, far from Christ. And I was loosening my grip on Christ. In the second semester I was there, and the only way I was able to go to U of I was through graduate assistantship. I was a teaching assistant, a research assistant, and I also coached wheelchair athletics. I coached wheelchair basketball, wheelchair track. And in the second semester I was teaching a course on a social construct of aging and that sort of thing. And there was a young woman in my class who I didn't really notice her much at all. But after the class was over, I was in my office. I'd open office hours. Bruce, my office was in Huff Hall, Huff Gym. Yeah. And the young woman, her name was Maureen, and she went by Mo, came into my office. And guys, it was like, she'd been in my class all semester. It's like I saw her for the first time. She was just radiant. She'd been ice skating. She had a pair of ice skates over her shoulder. And was checking on her semester grade. And in the course of that, I was asking her, well, where are you from, and what are your plans for Christmas? And she told me where she was from, a little town in Streator, Illinois. She lived on 14 acres, had some horses, and it overlooked the Vermilion River, which I personally knew to be a very productive smallmouth bass fishery. And so I said, well, that sounds like a place I would really enjoy. And you cannot imagine how out of character this was for my now wife to say. And she said, when would you like to come for a visit? And I said, I'm going to Kansas City for Christmas, and I'll be back to work on a grant proposal, and I'd like to come. And I went to her house. I didn't really know her. And I drove this long lane, and as I drove this lane, I really didn't know why I was going there. And she didn't know why I was coming. But she met me in the driveway. And when she did, I just gave her one of those side hugs, you know? And at that moment, I knew that she was my wife. And, you know, God never forsakes us. And he always keeps his promises, and he never ceases working for our good and his glory. And I was an idiot. I was blind. The women I was spending time with, no intent, they were not even on my radar. I would never marry them. And God, I think, just finally said, this guy, Steve, you are an idiot. You're blind. So he brought her into my life, and at that point is when my life really changed, and I returned really to Christ and to a Christ-centered life. And I mentioned I was losing my grip on Christ. But you know, the good news is, guys, he doesn't lose his grip on us. Okay? So don't forget that. That was in January. By summer, we were engaged. By the following spring, we were married. And we bought an old, dilapidated farmhouse in Tremont. You kind of saw it there. It was so bad, I told him, I said, we'll never buy this house. It's terrible. Well, of course, I bought it. And spent the next 10 years fixing it up. And what did life look like at that point? We had 4 biological kids and a station wagon, you know? It's kind of a typical, that's how life goes. But about that time, a friend of mine who was an accountability partner of mine, we began to apply some of the principles of business, like strategic planning and annual planning and vision statements and value statements, to our own personal lives. And I had 5 statements, and I won't go into all of them, but number 5 was I'm a lot of fun, which probably should have been number 1 because that's the one I was really good at. But here's a couple of things from my mission statement, or my values at that time. It said, I am God's man. I belong to God. I'm a man under authority. And he has the freedom to do whatever he wants, whatever he desires in my life. Now, you might be thinking, wow, Steve, how generous that you would give the sovereign king and creator of the universe, you know, the freedom to do whatever he wants in your life. It's kind of like Aladdin, you know, freeing the genie. Like God's, well, hey, the shackles are off, Steve. Awesome. But it was my way of saying to God that I'm yielding to his will in my life and his purpose in my life. And so that was a turning point too for me. And you know, guys, choosing to do something and doing it's two different things. Decisions are way overrated. Putting things in writing helps. Telling other people helps. I used to tell my kids, you know, hey, there were 5 frogs on a log, and 4 decided to jump. How many are left? And they were 4. I said, no, all 5. Deciding to jump and jumping, 2 different things. So that was a turning point for me. Our youngest son, Parker, was born in 1990, and a few years later in 1992, Mo was asking the Lord, what should I do with some of these clothes that our kids have outgrown? Should I put them in the attic and save them, or should I put them in the basement and give them away? And she heard God say, I want you to build an ark. Now, I only wish that I had an audio-visual recording of our conversation that same evening after the kids had gone to bed. So it went something like this. Me, so, honey, how was your day? Good. Busy. I sorted some clothes the kids have outgrown, and I put them in the attic. Me, oh, I thought you were planning to give those away. I was. But God said to build an ark. Me, uh-huh. Have you been reading that climate change magazine again? I mean, so as we studied the familiar story of Noah's Ark with a fresh new perspective, we began to understand that God was calling us to build an ark, not a literal ark, obviously, but to make preparation. Why? Because he was going to bring children into our family, 2 by 2, each according to their kind. And that we were not to go out and seek these kids. You know, in the Noah's Ark story, Noah didn't go get the animals, right? They just came 2 by 2. So just 2 years later, 2 little boys that were brothers came into our family, adopted from the Central Illinois community. Just a year later, 2 little girls who were sisters were adopted into our family. And you know, I marveled at God's grace and faithfulness that they did indeed come into our home 2 by 2. And candidly, I thought this was the coolest God story ever. And I could easily envision myself telling this story till the day I died. But was happy to do so. But I never envisioned or could have even imagined that he was not finished. A few years later, we felt the prompting of the Holy Spirit telling us that he was going to send more kids. And the words of Isaiah came alive to us in a very personal way. In Isaiah 60, we read, "Look and see, for everyone is coming home. Your sons will come from distant lands, your little daughters will be carried home, your eyes will shine, and your hearts will thrill with joy." And we understood that to mean that children were going to be coming from international, from other countries. And we had several close family members and friends who'd been adopting from Ukraine, China, Russia, but we understood, based on our calling, that we were not to seek any of those things. So you can imagine the range of emotions we had there, and mine was a practical one, and I thought, okay, there are 10 of us in this house. 10 of us are sharing 2 bathrooms, which is up from 1 bathroom of just 5 years earlier, because this old farmhouse had 1 bathroom, not even a shower, just a tub. And I thought, there's no room in this house, and I didn't really know what to do about that. But God used Isaiah 54 to speak to our hearts, and this is what Isaiah 54 says. "Enlarge the place of your tent. Let them stretch out the curtains of your habitations. Do not spare. Lengthen your cords and straighten your stakes, for you shall expand to the right and to the left." So on February 20th of 98, a building permit was granted, and we added 2,000 square feet to our old farmhouse. Mindful of the Noah's Ark story, it included lower, middle, and upper decks, and I even put in a window a cubit above. You guys know what a cubit is? It's the distance between here and there, okay? I want to read you this from Mo's journal. "We build in faith, believing this is God's will and that he will bring more of our children home. We share this with the workers as we have opportunity, praying that when it happens, it will build their faith." So we settled into the new addition a year later, and then all of 1999 passed, no kids. Okay. 6 months into 2000, no kids. And I thought, okay, God, it's how Noah must have felt. It's not raining. It's not raining. But then in October of 2000, we were in church, and a couple slips into the pew behind us and says, there's a sibling group of 5 from an orphanage in Brazil, and they're really wanting to keep these 5 together. Are you interested? Yes. So we went to Brazil. There's a 40-day cohabitation period required in Brazil. You actually spend 40 days there. The adoptions are completed in the country. I remember praying, Lord, I'm totally on board with this Noah's Ark thing. So there's really no need for it to rain 40 days and 40 nights, when I'm there. I just don't bother. I'm good with it. All 10 of us traveled to Brazil as a family. We returned home as a family of 14, just days before September 11th, 2001. Now, for all of you who are good at math in public, you're thinking, okay, this 2x2 thing isn't really shaken out. But don't worry, God wasn't finished. A few years later, we said yes to a call from the orphanage for a second group of 5, a sibling group of 5 from the orphanage. We returned just a few days before Christmas in 2005, and we were a family of 20, and God shut the door to the ark. And how did all that work? And we don't have time for all that. People ask me to this day, how did you do it? I have no idea. But we did have 2 washers, 2 dryers, 2 dishwashers, 3 refrigerators, 3 freezers, 3 water heaters, 2 water softeners, and a 15-passenger van. That's kind of how it worked logistically. But the story of the family Thompson continues, to unfold. And I want to tell you one story about that I think is pertinent, because it was true in my life. I think as men, we often ascend intellectually to truth, right? And all of you know that tonight, places too numerous to mention, that children will go to sleep dreaming about a place that has a warm bed and adequate food and a mom and a dad. And you know that. And I knew that. I knew that intellectually. But one night, it took a little child, our son Gabriel, who had been home not very long, and he was in bed, and Mo was rubbing his back, and he was full, his heart was full, and he was happy, and he was secure. I never tell the story without getting emotional, but he looked into his mom's eyes, and he said this. I think he was 4 years old. He looked at his mom and he said, when I was at the orphanage, I missed you so much. He paused a minute and then he added, I missed you, but I didn't know who you were. And I think that is the longing in every human heart, to belong, to be part of a family. Our daughter Liberty shared at an adoption conference in Orlando about this time a year ago. And I'll just read a couple of things from the things she said. I was born in the slums of a small, obscure colony in southern Brazil into a broken and violent home. Local authorities intervened and placed us in the orphanage where we lived for about 2 years. But I remember, life was a blur, but I remember getting the news that we were going to be adopted, all 5 of us. We were going to have a mom and a dad. She says, I thank God for giving me a loving mom and a dad and a family so that I could be redeemed and adopted twice. So that is the story of the ark, but it's intertwined in a big way, as Mitch mentioned, with the chosen, because Tyler, who was, we had two girls and 2 boys, and Tyler's the third in that biological group, from early on was writing and performing and as an artist and had a knack for video. He was producing biblical film on video when he was in middle school. He even borrowed an expensive camera from an advertising agency. One film that he produced was based on Fox's Book of Martyrs. And Mo was in charge of the costumes. I'm the props guy. We crucified Mo's brother-in-law upside down. Awesome. It's all in marketing too, you know. Hey, Bruce, you want to be in the movie? Yeah. Just lay right here. Okay. We burned our elders at the stake, and we kind of overestimated how much diesel was going to really. So Tyler's film career could have ended rather abruptly at a young age, but it moved on. And as Mitch mentioned, he had a ready cast. He forced all the siblings to be in the shows. Had an uncanny ability to get our church to come out in period costume and produce these films. Went on to Moody, went on to work with Dallas, created The Shepherd as the pilot for The Chosen, and today The Chosen is the first multi-series television show about the life of Christ, the single largest funded show of its kind in the world, and now the most translated television show in the world. Now, do you know what the most translated show is before we broke the record? Baywatch. Baywatch, Chosen. But unlike Baywatch, when you're translating The Chosen, you're translating the words of God, and it's important that we're accurate. And the translation of this show is powerful to speak to people in every country of the world in their heart language. Imagine being introduced to the authentic Jesus in your heart language. And the dubbing today, you guys remember the old Godzilla movies? You know, horrible. Today, technology, it's remarkable. We can take a single clip of a show, and the actors and the voices move seamlessly from Italian to French to Mandarin to German to Portuguese, and you're watching the lips and you can't believe it. Now, the first 100 languages or so, not easy but more achievable. It's not economically viable to translate in a lot of languages after that, and it's much more difficult. So AI will be a driving force in allowing us to translate the show at scale and at velocity. And that is the goal. So the role of Come and See, the foundation that supports the production, translation, and distribution of the show, is all about ensuring that this show is free, the gospel is free, and so will be The Chosen, and available and accessible to people in 600 languages. Why 600? At 600 languages, we reach 95% of the world's population. Imagine the world watching the resurrection together in their heart language just 2 Easters from now. It's a powerful and compelling case. I always tell people The Chosen strikes me as something, Jesus came in the fullness of time, right? What does that mean? Romans there were roads, it was the right time, it was the fullness of time for Christ to come. And every generation, Christ is revealed and communicated to the world in a fresh new way. In the early 70s, it was the Jesus film. Today, it's The Chosen. And what's different? The intersection of time, talent, technology, all against the backdrop of eternity. If you have a smartphone, you can watch The Chosen around the world. And our goal is to reach 1 billion people with a portrayal of the authentic Jesus, 1 billion plus people. And we're excited about that. The vice president for translation and localization is a guy named Rick Dempsey. He's a genius. He spent 30 years with Disney doing all of their international translation work. And we're gonna hit 600 languages. It's gonna take some time. It's gonna take some effort to dub one season of the show into one language is $64,000. To produce an episode of the show is $7 million. So a season is $56 million. Yellowstone spends more than that on a single episode. We do the entire season for $56 million. Yellowstone's spending that in one episode. But the quality, what has drawn people in, is what we refer to as speaking to the one, the quality. You know why many people don't watch The Chosen? I hear this story over and over. They don't want to watch it because why? It's going to be bad. It's going to be cheesy. It's going to be like every other Christian film and series that they've seen that's no good. That's changing, and that requires a high production quality and brilliant writing and all the rest. So one of the pillars is that, and that has to do with quality. Speaking to the one, speaking to the heart is the translation, distribution is the other piece, and ensuring that it remains free forever. In the app, if you don't have the Chosen app, just go get the Chosen app. Start watching. It takes almost $200,000 a week to have that app up and available and loaded with all the content in the translation. So that is what The Chosen is all about. And we hear time and time and time again the stories of how The Chosen is changing people's lives. And I appreciated Mitch underscoring this fact. It's a television show. Yep. It's driving people to the Bible. People that would never go to church, people that would never read the Bible are watching The Chosen. And they're being drawn to his humanity, his relatability. And the authors have put together these plausible, though non-biblical, storylines. I always think the good example is Simon. Simon in the series has a wife. Her name's Eden. She's a delightful character. They suffer a miscarriage, something very relatable in today's times. The Bible doesn't talk about Eden, doesn't talk about Simon's wife, but we know Simon had a wife. Why? Jesus healed his mother-in-law. It's that kind of storyline that's drawing people in, and everyone in every episode is finding themselves in one of those characters. So it's a powerful medium, and it's on a trajectory to reach 1 billion people. This was a quick story I'll read from somebody that we received just recently. Until recently, I didn't really believe in anything, and I didn't even know for sure that God existed. Back then, I'd been on medication to treat depression and anxiety, and I'd been thinking for many months before about committing suicide. On that day, I had a terrible nightmare, as I had been having for 2 months. Every night, I would have a nightmare, and on that particular day, I woke up and I thought, I'm already on medication, and I have double doses. I've been drinking up to 3 bottles of wine all by myself, and anything else that I think would help stop the pain. So I thought, I give up, and I'm going to jump. And on this day, instead of doing that, I called my mother, and I told her what I was planning to do, and we didn't even have a good relationship. But she went to rescue me, and she took me to her place. I didn't even have a television in my own home. So in her place, we watched a TV series called The Chosen. And on that day, I heard the words of God through that TV series, and I heard Isaiah 43:1 that says, "Don't be afraid. I have redeemed you. I've called you by name. You're mine." And that kept playing and replaying in my mind, and then before I went to sleep for the first time, I prayed to Jesus and asked him to forgive me because I'd never believed in him before. And here I am asking for his help. So I asked for his help, and I asked for a good night of sleep, and I had a beautiful dream. And in that dream, I felt the most beautiful and holy peace I've ever felt in my life, and I know it was Jesus in my dream. When I woke up, I felt like a new person, and I started crying. I didn't even know what the emotion was, but it was joy. I told my mother I was healed, that Jesus healed me, and she said, "What are you talking about?" I said it again. Jesus healed me. He heard my prayers. And after this day, I never used medication again for depression. I stopped drinking, and I just felt the need to thank Jesus, and I didn't know how. So I started praying, and I looked for a church, and she became part of Acts 29 church. So we get these stories, we hear them all the time, and The Chosen is a television show. You're not saved by a television show. You're saved by Jesus. But people don't know him. Making him known. That's the goal. Guys, it's been a pleasure to be here. And I know you've probably got some questions about Chosen. And you might think that being Tyler's dad, that I've got some inside information. This guy is really tight-lipped. He probably tells his mom stuff. I don't know. But yeah, it's bad. So real quick before we open to Q&A, season 5 is coming out in the spring. It's Holy Week. So look for the triumphal entry. Look for Jesus to clear the temple, and I mean clear it. The Last Supper. We're leading up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. So look for season 5. We're right now in the period of funding for season 6. Our goal is to fund half of 6 by the time we start filming. We film in Midlothian, Texas, and in Goshen, Utah. We hope to have half of the funding in place by April 1, so we start filming, and we conclude the funding before the filming is wrapped, typically in late July or August.